Hello and good morning to Defense Diaries. I am your host, Bob Motta, and I am joined by my beautiful and talented co-host, Lauren Bright Pacheco. What is up? How are
I'll
you?
I am so happy it's Friday.
Me too. Me too. And I've had a weird
You
week,
have.
a
You
lot of
have.
traveling. So we had to push this, and we are on our fifth episode of our Q&A series for Murder on Songbird Road podcast. It's going to seem a little disjointed because we know that 6 just dropped yesterday and we're going back and talking about 5. We will field some questions if you have questions about 6, but we still plan on doing the full Q&A for 6 next Tuesday when I'm back home. So just try to keep it to 5 if you can. There's plenty to talk about with respect to 5. 5, I know, Lauren, hit you exceptionally hard because of the circumstances around the birth. So let's try to focus on that, and I'll keep an eye out on the chat, and try to start questions that I think are relevant and good. So going into 5, like what really kind of struck you with that? And again, I'm a man. I can't pretend that I've ever given birth to a child. Now I'm a father. It's a different experience, carrying that child to term. And then I can only pretend once again to have an idea of what that would feel like as a mother. So like what kind of resonated with you when you were writing that particular episode?
You know, having had really the experience of birthing 2 kids, I found it so jarring to hear from Julie the way in which that delivery went down. And keep in mind, and I we do hit this rather hard in the episode, but this is when she was to be afforded the presumption of innocence.
Right.
She was not convicted of anything.
Right.
And so honestly, for me, this was one of the biggest initial red flags. And it was fascinating because Julie didn't question it. I think that she was so in the throes of her day to day that she didn't have the bandwidth to take a step back and demand answers. She was to be afforded due process, which means that even if they had made this decision that she should not be able to keep her child for any duration of time, she should have had a chance to fight that in
Yeah.
court. And, look, we know from speaking to Renee, the moment Julie found out she was pregnant, Renee started petitioning to have her do house arrest, to have her just for the duration of the pregnancy to live under her home. And they kept coming up with different excuses, but it wasn't until they listened to that episode, and I mean Renee, that she really truly understood that they violated Beverly's reproductive rights. They broke the law in Illinois to have that unfold the way in which it did. So if they're willing to do that, what else are they willing to do?
Right.
And
And finish.
no, so that for me, the lack of presumption of innocence, not even just into the tunnel vision, but to double down the way in which they did with the pregnancy and the delivery raised huge red flags in terms of whether or not she was going to be able to get a fair trial. And keep in mind, again, this was like lockdown. Most people didn't even know that she had given birth under those situations until they listened to the episode, but they certainly didn't realize that she had given birth in jail until the trial. And it was just glossed over.
100%. And it's probably coming from the law field in terms of being an attorney, the most frustrating, and specifically a defense attorney, the most frustrating thing for me to try to impart to people is that pesky presumption of innocence that we have in this country. And I always try to explain it to people in the sense that it's a mindset. It's like you have to think that way. It's not a matter of, oh, I'm not a juror in the case. It doesn't matter. That's a trial thing. No, that's a way of living. That's the system in which we have chosen to live, whereby the government has the burden to prove that we've done something beyond a reasonable doubt before they can imprison us. And I say this all the time, we don't want to live where it's the other way around. Like, just my word for it. And I get so much pushback all the time. And it's always that counter argument. Well, I'm not a juror. I'm not going to be involved in the case. I'm allowed to have an opinion. I'm like, yes, you are. We all form opinions. Every single one of us forms an initial opinion on something. The fact of the matter is the mindset that you have to form that opinion around is that that person is innocent until they prove it. Because, and this is what I'm always trying to drive home, the cops weren't there. The prosecutors weren't there. We weren't there as defense attorneys. We were not there when the commission of the crime took place. So what you have is a narrative and nothing more. Things have to be tested at trial. They have to be vetted at trial. And that's the only time that you'll ever know, as much as we can, especially in a circumstantial case like this, what may have happened. But for anybody to presume that the state's theory is the correct theory is just not looking at the system the right way. And it's one of those things that I've constantly battled. And frankly, the reality, Lauren, is that I don't think that a vast majority of Americans buy into the concept of a presumption of innocence, which is so frustrating. You know when it hits home to people, when it happens to them or somebody that they love.
I was just about to say, so, for me, why this impacted, and there have been some great comments, including one I was going to say when we first joined. I think you got your hair cut. You look all clean cut all of a sudden.
I did. I had to land in Tennessee in Knoxville and find a bar, like a place to get my hair cut. Because I had an appointment on Monday, and then I had to fly out to Tampa for that, my family thing. And so I missed my hair appointment. I'm like, and I was ridiculously shaggy. So yeah, I went and got the
I love this expression. Did you get your butter whipped?
I did. I got the butter whipped. I got the butter whipped. They know. I did get the butter whipped.
But yeah, you called it out. Yeah, I showered. I didn't get my butter whipped last time, but I showered beforehand. So that's like, you're living low maintenance when a shower feels like a makeover. It's like, I'm just writing the episodes, guys. That's all I can do these days. But going back to what you said, I think it's really true. And I think for me, which we do have, because we included them in the visual trailer for the podcast. But when you look at the photos that Dr. Humphrey insisted were taken of Julie with her son, Thomas, it is impossible, I think, as a human. I'm not even going to play the female card, as a human, to see that, because birthing's not easy. It completely takes it out of you mentally, physically, emotionally. And to go through all of that. And I thought that her cousin Nikki really, really put it well to say that at the tail end of all of it, you have the baby with you. And that kind of softens everything you've just gone through.
Right.
And then for her to not have even her son for the 72 hours she was to have been afforded by law, it's heart-wrenching. And even more than that, I think that if one puts oneself, you have daughters, you have a wife, you don't have to have had the experience of giving birth to know what that must have been like. Yeah. And it's very telling on top of it that once I started saying, hey, so, this happened. Can you send me the court order? Because the jailhouse nurse said that a judge signed off on it. Where's the paper?
Right.
There was no paper shown to Beverly. There was no paper shown to Dr. Humphrey. It was just, this is the way it's going to go down, under whose authority. And once I started pushing for those answers, the pushback was like nothing I'd ever seen. And that's how I knew we were onto something. Now,
Yeah.
we get into it in a few episodes as to, what should make the judge most nervous in this case, but the fact that they are going to have to answer for that at some point. There is going to be a legal reckoning.
Yeah. And I don't know if it'll be, she's certainly got a what they call a 1983 civil rights claim. There's no question about that, sounding in the Reproduction Rights Act. And, but the question becomes, how did it impact the criminal proceedings? And it's interesting. And it's that point that you're always trying to make, which is, it was a window into the soul of law enforcement and the prosecution in terms of how they were viewing her, which isn't out of the ordinary. I always feel like I've said this multiple times. I always feel like I have to go in with the burden of proving that my client didn't do it. However, that's not the way that this thing has been set up in terms of our criminal justice system. And it really does reflect very early on exactly how they felt about her, without having the benefit of going through the trial, because it's always that thing. I'm like, yes, everybody forms an opinion, but please, for the love of God, don't form your final opinion until they've gone to trial. Because in this country where 95% of cases or more plead out, okay, most of the times they get it right. Most of the times they have strong evidence. Most of the time there's no question. All right, yeah, they got the right one. This case, I feel very secure with the conviction. However, the fact remains is that they don't always get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those cases like this that have to be looked at very, very carefully. And that's where every single thing that took place leading up to that trial matters. And that tells you what the mindset of everybody that involved was at the time that they were investigating or not investigating this particular case. And you knew just by their actions that they decided not to do anything beyond what they had done with Julia Beverly. That was it. Once they felt that they had enough in terms of a narrative, because make no bones about this case was won on a narrative. This was not a case that was won on evidence. It was a narrative wherein they were able to tie in the lies that Julie had stated during her interviews, and they just
play into the evil stepmother.
Right, they plugged it all in. It was plug and play. It was like writing a book. It was like, okay, perfect. We've got mom there. We've got mom leaving. We've got her, the last one to see her. The last one, she's the one who discovers the body. We have the call. She tells lies. It was just like boom, 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 where evidence became secondary in terms of the narrative itself. And we can't live in a country where the narrative is winning. There has to be evidence in order to feel secure about a conviction.
Steph asks a really great question. And I'd ask this, you answer first and then I'll answer from my perspective. But would you say the presumption of innocence has deteriorated in society over your career or stayed the same as when you started?
I think it's always been the same. I mean, since the day I stepped into a courtroom, probably with my father, and obviously growing up with a defense attorney, I heard that side of it quite a bit, and I mean, obviously it was ingrained in me in terms of what defense attorneys really try to do and what we do for society at large. And I just feel it hasn't deteriorated at all. If anything, within the last 5 years, especially, I've started to see a shift. I've started to see more and more people, especially within my community, I have a pretty loud voice out here, especially with people saying, like, my favorite comment in the world ever that I get, and I get them consistently, is I did not like defense attorneys at all until I started listening to your podcast and watching you on YouTube. And then it changed the way I think about things. And that's all that I ever ask. Just have an open enough mind to absorb what I'm saying and just think about it for yourself. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything other than what the law is. But in terms of changing your mindset, you have to be open to thinking about it, to understanding, okay, yeah, they are the government. And when you think about the government at large, I think all of us have some real reservations about the government, right? I mean, it's an amorphous body that it was created through a document that we elect people to go to Washington, to our state capitals, wherever. And you know, it's not a person. It's not, it's the government is just this thing that exists wherein we need to watch what they're doing.
Yeah, because power breeds corruption.
It absolutely does. And
It does.
money.
Absolute power absolutely corrupts. And so there's always that potential. But I agree with you. And I do think there is a growing awareness. And so this is what I would say. I would say that I think we all deeply want to believe in the presumption of innocence when it comes to ourselves and when it comes to our, tight knit family or larger circle.
Right.
But if you look at how quickly we've all been to judge stuff that comes up within the news. And I think that it's very telling too, when Renee Hightower talks about Beverly's arrest, when, Detective Cindy Geitman was being very rough with her as she was handcuffing her. And her grandmother said, "You're hurting her, like you're going to kill her." And Geitman, without missing a beat, turns around and says, "That's what she gets for killing someone."
That's it.
But as the arrest is happening, there's no presumption of innocence. But Renee Hightower turned to her aghast and said, "Why would you say that?"
Right. I mean, but Lauren,
in that moment,
that is the world we live in. And it's the thing that I'm always talking about, because when you have a crime that occurs and it gets reported on initially, and depending on how long it takes them to make an arrest, especially if it's a case that's getting a lot of notoriety and it's being covered pretty heavily, leading up to that arrest, we really don't know what's going on. We hear whatever facts can be culled by the media in terms of what happened. And then when an arrest is made, I always try to remind people, I'm like, all you're hearing at that point is the state's theory of the case, keeping in mind, once again, that they weren't there. The prosecuting attorney was not there when the crime was committed. Neither were the cops. So what they're doing is they're taking the evidence, they're looking at it, and they're forming a theory of the case. And that's all it is. Every case is a theory of the case. Now, there's some which are clear cut. I mean, if you have smoking gun evidence, if you've got that direct evidence whereby somebody's caught on a recording, they're videotaped committing the crime, that's an easy one, right? But when you're talking about circumstantial cases, and how it has been in our country forever has been that the state has always been the one that gets their theory of the case out to the public first. It goes unchallenged.
The media, because they give their press conferences, and
right.
The family's often told, as in the case with many of these cases that I've covered, not to speak to the press.
Right. Well, it's critical for them to get the family on board immediately as soon as an arrest is made, because they're not giving family members the details. They're going in and they're sitting them down. They're saying, "Yeah,
don't even give this another thought. You do your grieving. There's no doubt that we've got the right person."
Exactly.
Spitfire Dragon, the Spitfire Dragon. The visual trailer is actually on social media, not on YouTube, and I think that Bob did post it.
I did.
And we can get you a link as well.
Yeah. One of the mods, can you drop the link in there? I think it should be. I forget where I posted it. I think I posted it on Twitter. It's definitely on my Twitter account. Let me see.
And while you're doing that, Marissa says that she has thoughts on the Jade family members. Can't say much because it was a 10-minute thing, but I think they're perceptive. Well, okay, so I agree with you. Possibly it wasn't conscious. So here's the thing. Those emotions, those feelings have been marinating now for 4 years. And Jade's family basically was given closure in terms of the conviction. And Bob and I have said this as well. We are deeply appreciative and deeply respective of the fact that they were willing to give us the grace to sit down with us and leave that door open for, if you guys uncover something, which, spoiler alert, we have, which we will get to, but if you uncover something that can show us that she shouldn't have been convicted, or that that they were open to being open to it. And that in and of itself is so rare. It was such a tremendous opportunity. But I agree with you, Marissa, that it could be a subconscious thing, something that is called retrospective bias. And retrospective bias is when you, after the fact, imbue an individual or a situation with more kind of nefarious intent, because that's what ended up happening down the road. So, if tomorrow I'm arrested for doing something horrible, people might then view our past interactions in a different prism. Like, they might then look at a weird laugh that I had over telling a story, or that I was careless throwing away my dog's poop diaper. It's like poop bag. It's very easy to read negative intent in retrospect.
Yeah, it is. And I took a lot of grief in my coverage of the Delphi case, where I had questions about the process, and so I like, a lot of people were doing like a lot of wringing the pathos out of saying, oh, Bob's not supporting the family, Bob's fighting the fam, Bob doesn't care about Abby. And I'm like, nothing could be further from the truth. And it was so important for both you and I to have that lengthy conversation, which like, you guys have to obviously realize we had to pare down what we were going to put in the episodes, but that was a very lengthy conversation that we had with both Brenda and Bailey. And we were both incredibly thankful, because it went to the bigger point that I was trying to make in the Delphi case, which is justice is only served if the right person has been arrested and ultimately convicted.
Otherwise, it should never be arbitrary.
Right.
It's not an eye for any eye.
Right. That is not a debate. That is not a debate that I'm willing to have with anybody, because it's not a debate. That's just incorrect, unequivocally. So, for us to be able to have the opportunity to sit down with those two and have them flat out tell us, like, right at the beginning, look, we feel like they got the right person here. And we're like, we understand that, but they still, even though they feel that way, they had the ability to be able to sit there and listen to what we had to say, which of course sparked questions in their minds, which they then asked us. And by the end of that conversation, it was unbelievable, because they had given us the grace and the space to allow us to say, hey, this is what we're pulling up in terms of our investigation. This is what we've dug up. And, they're like, look, I mean, if you guys come up with something that shows that she didn't do it, obviously we're going to apologize. They left themselves that small amount of space to allow themselves to change their mind as to what happened here, which is unbelievable, really. And it was like, I wanted to talk to all of the family members in the Richard Allen case to have that exact conversation. I'm like, look, I have no idea whether or not Richard Allen did it or not, but what I can tell you is that the process leading up to it has been an absolute shit show. And what the likelihood of this is going to end up being is you are going to have to sit in this courtroom again and go through all of this bullshit again, because they butchered it the first time.
That's another thing that I want to bring up too. And Mags, I will get to that question. That's an excellent question. And I will answer it to the extent that I can without spoilers. But, wrongful convictions, if that is where this ends up, you're absolutely right. They don't just victimize the victim, the innocent person who is incarcerated, but the ripple of that revisiting everything again for the family they're re-traumatized.
Yeah.
Because it's the ultimate gaslighting.
It is.
Ultimate gaslighting. And so, yes, we do have footage of the Huck's garbage disposal. And I can tell you that it is a combination of that and the way in which it was framed in court that led many people, not just Brenda and Bailey, to have that interpretation of it. And we will get into it very, very thoroughly in episode 9. You will see exactly what we saw and hear exactly what we witnessed as well. But that will shake a lot of people too.
Yeah, look, in these cases, perception is everything, you know, and it's when you've got the state able to put out whatever their theory is initially, they're able to form those perceptions again, going unchallenged. You know, in this case was like the common case, whereas you don't hear anything from the defense leading up to trial. You know, the two things that have been different about like the Karen Reed case and the Delphi case, which were both like wildly followed by, you know, the world, really, both those cases, were that the defense in both of those cases came out with their full theory of defense to challenge the state's narrative leading up to trial. And that is why you saw this just absolute divide and a toxic divide at that, in between these two camps, where people are like, oh my God, like, I don't know if what they're saying is true, but I'm willing to listen to it. And then you had people go even further and say, oh, well, I believe what they're saying is true. I don't think they have the right person. So in both of those cases, you have this just rare occurrence where the defense is able to kind of get their narrative, their full narrative out, which just doesn't happen. I think it's going to start happening more frequently because of the impact that I think that it has. And it really does allow people to, because look, if you're gonna tell a story and there's a question of whether or not it's true or not, and you're the only one telling it, your version of it, of course, people are going to tend to think that your version's true because it's not going challenged by anybody else. Nobody's challenging your facts. So, you know, of course I'm going to be like, oh, it sounds legitimate. You know, it's like, does it pass the stink test or not? And that's it. There's no prodding and poking.
Well, you know, look, getting that kind of platform to share your narrative is not easy. Right. And that's what, you know, look, we've talked about the benefits of podcasting to have the ability to retry a case in the court of public opinion, because we get to share things that the defense didn't attack on and that the prosecution hid. But look, if you have all the money in the world, you're probably going to do something along the lines of Justin Baldoni and the Blake Lively case. You're going to try to get ahead of it with your narrative.
Right.
And, you know, that's not many people have that kind of legal team behind them. What kind of stunt did his attorney pull for him to receive the baby? Now, here's the thing. We don't know. And the reason why we don't know is because they don't have the court order that they claimed they had. They had a temporary custody order, but there was never, as we've stated, she was to have been given due process. So that means even if the state had decided, look, she is in the throes of psychotic delusion, the baby wouldn't be safe with her for 1 second, they would have had to have done that in a court of law and given her the chance to answer those charges, to fight that ruling. It doesn't appear to exist.
And I can tell you that in Illinois, the way that the law works with respect to parental rights is that if you have a situation where there's a presumption, if you are married, that the child is the husband / the father. So you don't have to do anything beyond being married because there's a rebuttable presumption that is the father. In a situation such as this, where the parties were not married, and if Mike had not like in Illinois, we have what's called a VAP, a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity, which is typically signed in the hospital. So we know Mike didn't sign that because obviously he wasn't there. Additionally, what happens after that is that you have to go and establish your parentage in a court of law. So meaning that typically, like if you have two parties that have a kid, they split up. Mom's like, well, I need child support. Dad's like, oh, well, I don't even know if it's mine or whatever. You know, you got to go in and you get a file for support. And then you also file to establish parentage. So we don't know if that happened here, right? Like I don't know if there exists an actual court order establishing that Mike is the father. So whatever happened in terms of the state just handing the baby over to that side is a interesting question. And we know that Renee has been fighting desperately in and out of court, trying to get her hands on her grandchild so she could spend time and develop a relationship. So those are all great questions, Lisa, and they're ones that we really haven't been able to delve into to the extent to where I've been able to go into the docket to see what, if anything, Mike did.
Because I had been given 2 temporary custody, and so nothing that actually addresses the immediate removal. And I think it was Lisa brought up a point too, that you're right, Renee Hightower would have taken the baby immediately. And it's not as if they didn't realize she was very much petitioning the court to have Julie with her. So it's not as if she wouldn't have stepped up.
Right.
But again, the way in which that played out, that was denied, they weren't told. Their lawyer wasn't told. They read that her petitioning the court to give birth under house arrest, it was posted on social media. So there was one family had access to all the information in real time, and one family was being kept in the dark. Again, it goes back to this othering, but there's no way you're not othering a woman when you basically treat her like she's livestock, and you can just take a child from her without having the legal authority to do it. And what we have come up against many times is this passing of the buck. Well, the sheriff retired. Good luck with that. You know, or even worse, sending me the wrong documentation.
Well, here's what I'm asking you. Are you aware of what I'm saying? In Illinois, it's not a free-for-all. So meaning that Mike wouldn't have had standing unless he had gone into a court of law establishing that he was the father of the child. Do you know if that occurred?
He only had the temporary custody, which they amended to include the unborn child right before the birth, because keep in mind, this was induced labor.
I'd have to see how that process went. Like who filed something? You know what I'm saying? Was it
the temporary custody was filed right after it happened, so that the girls didn't go into foster care. There had to be that decision. So that's what they piggybacked on it.
Who filed it is what I'm saying. Was it DCFS?
It was the family court. So it was initiated by DCFS, yes.
Yeah, see, that's
but they were no longer involved at the point of the birth. That's where things get really slippery and really trickery, because again, the sheriff's office, because she was in Williamson County Jail, they were supposed to keep very detailed, specific records of each and every single time she was shackled as a pregnant or postpartum woman.
What I'm going to Lisa's point, the point being that I understand all that, and I understand that leading up to the birth that the DCFS had filed paperwork. However, you have a situation where you do not have a married couple. Mike had to have gone into a court of law, stood in front of a judge and say, I am the father of this child, and then have a court order entered saying that he is. Otherwise, the Beasley family does not have any standing to go into a court of law because he is not the father in the eyes of the law. So
they just amended the temporary custody order. That's it.
Right.
That's it.
So, I mean, if Renee's attorney was looking into that aspect of it, that would have been the way to attack it. You know, that's not to say that Mike couldn't have gone in and said, yeah, oh, okay, yeah, I'm the dad, I'll accept paternity, you know, and the order is entered at that point, but still, it's like it's just par for the course of what went on here. You know,
Yeah, and information is a hell of a thing, right? And we know that the 72 hour went into effect almost a month before Thomas was born. So there's no way that they weren't aware of this change. I should think that they were all notified of this alteration of the existing law. But, even before that, she would have had the right to give birth without corrections officers in the room. Just think of how dehumanizing all of that is, and that's the point.
yeah. So what is the child's last name?
Well, they've changed his first name, as you know,
Yep.
but they all have Mike's last name.
Okay. Which is just crazy because he wasn't there for the birth. You know, yeah, like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's
But
like
but again, look, I know that it is difficult to jump to assumptions too, and many people have sent direct messages kind of inquiring as to the dynamic between the couple, but I think that you have to understand when one person is being not just spoon-fed a narrative, but force-fed a narrative.
well, I'm not blaming Mike at
Oh,
all.
no, I know, but I'm saying that I know that we've gotten a lot of comments about, under what, um, he had paternal rights, under what guise, under what, and how he could have so quickly decided that Beverly was guilty,
Right.
looking back.
And beyond that, I mean, within the first 10 minutes of our conversation with him, it became clear to us what his mindset about Julia was in terms of what was going on with them. So, I think there was a part of him that was very much like,
That's a spoiler alert.
yeah, well, like, I don't know how Lisa, it was that in 7. Lisa must have gotten to it. Lisa's devouring the pot. Like, Lisa has sent me
Lisa's
some,
on it. Lisa
yeah,
is on it.
she had sent me some lengthy stuff. And I always do see your stuff. We don't mean to. Lisa, you jump way too far ahead, girl. That's the problem with your questions. You're not playing the game right. You're leading everybody down the primrose path that we haven't laid yet. So you're too far ahead, Lisa. You got to stay back on 5 with us. Because you do ask a lot of great questions, Lisa. You really do. And one of the things, because Lisa's theory, Lauren, is exactly what our theory was before we spoke to Mike, which that was like.
Yep.
So Lisa,
Yep.
we're not going to get into it.
Wait,
now.
Lisa, we will get into it with you. Promise.
No, I didn't even want to. I didn't even email you back, Lisa, because that is exactly what Lauren and I's theory was.
And again, I will say that this case for a long time has been a split personality roller coaster ride. You're going in both directions just as quickly.
Yeah.
But I can tell you now I'm halfway through episode 10.
Yeah. Oh, good.
And it's.
I think your whole concept of it being 11 seems super ambitious. I don't think it's gonna, like, how are you
says the guy who did 385,000 episodes on Gacy.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think in terms of that episode, I think it was really, really powerful. I think that and we want the takeaway from it is be angry about the way that a pretrial detainee was being treated. That matters. It matters in this country. We don't want to have pretrial detainees treating as if they're in Guantanamo Bay. We can't have that. That's not the country we live in. That presumption of innocence matters. It's how the entire thing was built around that concept. That's why we have trials. That's how the trial is set up. That's why the state has the burden. It all goes back to that concept of the presumption of innocence. So we wanted you to have 2 takeaways. We wanted you to be enraged that an American citizen was being treated as such in terms of the birth of her child, but we also wanted to highlight the fact that this is giving you a direct peek into the mindset of law enforcement in the state in terms of how they were viewing this case, which then you have to parlay that with how the investigation went. So it's like when you put all those pieces together and you can see very clearly they had her dead to rights in their minds. They didn't care. They nailed it. Case closed. We're just going to go to trial on this
And
thing.
everything else became punitive.
That was it, right? So it
Yeah.
was all.
So I also do think that, you know, if one puts oneself in the mindset of either family in the aftermath of this. So you have one family that is being kind of cocooned and cushioned in their grief and, you know, a ton of support, and then the vilification of the other family, the othering of them, the lack of information, the lack of support. And Renee is kind of left to start building her binders, you know, to have to fight for her daughter at the same time she's fighting on social media with everyone. And then it kind of becomes, you know, this horrific situation where she's just standing there basically being pelted by frozen turds in every single direction. You know, there is no clear path for her forward.
Right.
And there honestly, I don't think was until she got this on our radar, because she desperately needed somebody to advocate for her daughter, and she wasn't getting that from the public defender. And that is another really ugly side to all of this. If
Yeah.
they had a high-powered private attorney, a fancy defense attorney like you, Mr. Motta, or
Yeah.
or your lovely wife.
It's the frustrating thing about this case. You know, when you see that there was no resistance from the defense side of it in terms of putting forth anything to rebut any of the evidence, it's so frustrating. You know, and we were warned by Thien, who was the PD, going into our investigation. Look, you're not going to be happy. Like, yeah, and she was spot on. I mean, she probably undersold just how bad it was, but I mean, she owned it to a certain extent in terms of her performance and knowing that she had just dropped the ball on this case. And again, you know, the terrifying part of cases like this, if in fact Julia is innocent, is that undoing it is so hard. It's so hard to do. And, you know, so I mean, and I saw, and I like this question, and we're going to get to it, Carrie, but I had seen the comment, you know, what can we do for Julia? Talk, get it out there, get this,
Mhm.
like pressure creates diamonds. You know what I'm saying? It really does. We need this thing to get out. We want people talking about it. We want a narrative created where people are talking about this case to where people start looking at it a little more critically.
I did get a couple of emails to the investigating murder at iheartmedia.com address. And people want to know if they can reach out to Julie via mail or email. And I did get permission for that. So I will give you that information that you can share.
Awesome.
And we'll also probably share it in the final episode. But so, Carrie, this is a great question. As a
Love
parent,
that question.
you are always trying to be time efficient. It bugs me she stopped putting rubbish out knowing she was coming back. Wouldn't you just do it when coming back? Not saying that says guilt. Okay. Great question, but I've been in this exact situation. You know, I have a work bag and I have like a smaller recreational bag. I have driven to go to the supermarket or, you know, to Costco and go to kind of get my card and realize I didn't put my stupid wallet in the smaller bag. And in that moment, probably I have looked around to see if there's anything that I couldn't get done in that moment for that very, I'm frustrated that I've just wasted 25 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it is. And so she rummaged around and realized, oh, I never threw that poop bag away. So it was a time and a place to do it as opposed to doing it at home.
Yeah. And there is not a time that I don't stop at a gas station, whether it's to get gas or whether I'm running in to grab something from the convenience store, that if I have garbage in my car, that I don't throw it out. Well, I mean, I guess it depends.
I can attest to that because I have traveled with you, and
True.
in our road trips, we both do that.
Yeah.
I cannot stand just trash
Right.
in the car.
I don't want shit in my car. And you know, I guess the bigger question for us to Julia would have been, or will be, is that your habit? Like if you've got like, some people don't keep a clean car. Like, you know, some people just have shit all in their car. Right. It drives me nuts. So I don't do that. And I always, if I have the opportunity to toss it, I mean, if I'm going through a drive-through where I've gotten my kids Chick-fil-A or whatever, you know, Cane's, whatever it is, and they have that garbage can when you're pulling around the drive-through, if I have anything in there, I'm throwing stuff out there. So I guess it's probably a matter of habit. But I mean, the point is well made in terms of, but again, remember,
I think in that moment where you're just like, ugh, what's become of my life? I forgot my wallet. You are
right.
going to look for something productive you can do in that moment. And that's how I think.
And beyond that, I mean, she had left the house with the intention to go shopping. So she knew she was going to be away for a minute or two, meaning like a half an hour to an hour or a little bit longer if she would have gotten the shopping done. So her mindset's not there like, oh my God, I have to rush to get back because I left my kid back there. You know what I mean? She had already made a decision to leave the house with an 11-year-old. And look, we live in much different times. I happen to be a latchkey kid. At age 11, I had a key that was around my neck when I got home from school because my parents both worked. My mother worked and my father worked, and you know, childcare wasn't necessarily a thing, and it felt like a safer time back then. I don't necessarily think that it was, but you know, it was like I would come home from school, I'd have my key, I'd get in, I'd make a bowl of cereal, I'd have a snack, whatever, and then I'd go out and play with my friends until it got dark, and that was after school. So, I mean, different times, you know, I mean, it's different times certainly these days. It's a shame. It's a shame. I don't think that we need to be able to that we feel like we have to have our kids held hostage because we're so afraid of them going outside. It's a real shame that that's what our society has become. And that's what our mindset has become because there's just so much danger out there. So I get it, obviously.
Oh gosh,
However,
I was a free range chicken child. You know, we grew up in kind of the country and we were let out of the house early in
yeah,
the morning and you came home if you had to go to the bathroom or not even all the time because we lived
right,
by a lake, but you know, if you were hungry, and
right.
that was it. You know, you
Yeah.
were called for dinner.
Oh my God. Like that just brought back a flood of memories of me
Nope,
like, being
nobody
out like
was following us around with a water bottle.
no, I like 3
Desperately
hours
afraid we're going to
into
be dehydrated.
like a heavy duty like play session and realizing that I really have to go to the bathroom and then like but not wanting to leave your friends because you know the FOMO. Like, and this is when you're 10, 11, 12, and then me trying to remember what I would do. Maybe I crap my pants. I don't know. I don't ever remember running home. So I don't know. I didn't have a lake like you. I wasn't a
Deep childhood confessions with Bob
yeah,
Hatta.
yeah.
Wait, go back. Carrie has my point being that when you do come back to save those few minutes, like you said, you just wasted time. So why waste a few more minutes getting in and out of the car?
I
Do
think
it when
I
you come
hope
back.
I addressed that. Like, I don't think that that's what her mind was. Is that
And this is not a. They didn't have a garage, Carrie. So this was, you know, it. I think that it was just an opportunity. And then I want to go back to Lisa's question too,
I
because
knew.
Lisa, you know, she wanted to know about that 30 minutes.
Yeah.
We've tackled it and we do tackle it in an upcoming episode because I really grill Julie on it. And so I don't want to give a spoiler for that, but just know we're not quite convinced that it was 30 minutes.
Right.
That is the official timeline. And because that timeline was never attacked by the defense, and you will find it staggering to the extent that it wasn't attacked by the defense, but also how it wasn't really properly investigated by the prosecution. That's all I'll say.
Yeah,
That's
because that's coming. And like, look, anything, and I promise you, everything that you guys are thinking that has given you pause, Laura and I have thought the same thing, and we address all of it. So those are like what the things that we call the bad facts are all the things that we are going to 100% address, and we try to do it as fully as humanly possible because like I just had burning questions. Like and Lisa, I read your messages, I see them. You have a lot of the exact same questions. You're very astute that way. So I can almost guarantee you that everything that you've asked me, and if you've been wondering why I'm not answering, you're jumping, like I said, you're jumping way too far ahead, and that's all coming. Like I promise we're going to get to it because we really do delve into, all right, we set it up. This is what the state's theory of the case is. We start giving you some facts that we start to dig up as it progresses, and then we're going to go back and we're going to start addressing. So we're going to be like, okay, we've got what we feel like amounts to reasonable doubt, at least in my estimation. However, let's address the bad facts in this case. They still exist in this world, and we can't just say, okay, because ultimately it's that we have to weigh them. Does what we believe is reasonable doubt, does that outweigh these bad facts? And are there valid explanations for this? Because I mean, like you can change the context of anything in terms of how you decide to present it. So, and again, that's what I'm saying. Like when you present the bad facts that exist in this case and you're plugging them into that narrative in terms of the state, it's a very effective narrative for them. I mean, they did a very good job in terms of building out their narrative, and they had, like I said, some real nice, juicy plug and play type facts that really fed into that narrative. So,
and then when you start poking holes in them, when
yeah.
you start picking them down, when we really get into the trial transcripts,
Yeah.
Meg, so her eldest son, Jaden, was with his father, Stuart, for the weekend. And all three of the kids, so Jade and the two younger girls that Mike and Julia shared, were staying with Sheila, the paternal grandmother. And Jade actually asked to come back to spend the weekend at her father's house because she was going to be going to a birthday party that weekend and she wanted to see her dad. And they were fine with that. And they had actually plans to go out as a couple on Friday night, but Beverly wasn't comfortable leaving Jade alone. So she stayed home with Jade the night before the murder willingly. And that is by everyone's account.
Yeah. Yeah. So where are you?
Thank you, Brian, for sharing that.
Yeah, it's important. It's important to know.
That was like, look, my son will be horrified that I'm sharing this, but when he was a little kid, that's all he wanted to do. He'd say, I have to go to the bathroom. And I'd say, we're almost home. And as soon as we'd get home, he'd run into the backyard. And I'd say, go inside. Like, you don't have to, but he just,
it's very
that was
liberating.
the end all be all. Yeah.
It's very liberating to be outside.
Yeah, man, yeah.
It's going back to basics, you know what I mean?
Absolutely loved any opportunity to write his name in the snow.
Yeah. So we're going to go back to Tuesday next week for episode 6. What are your closing thoughts here? What do you want to impart to the kids as we close out this episode?
So I know that I've been hyping episode 5 as being a turning point and saying that the wheels really come off after that. But it was the diving into the backup for how they pulled off the immediate removal of the infant from Beverly and the fact that they'd corrections officers. And after that interview with the ACLU of Illinois, after that, it really opened the floodgates of other information coming our way because they had none for the circumstances around the birth. And so that really ended up being kind of a gift of sorts because they had to give me something. And as we've already said, you know, I ended up going to the Attorney General's office. But I think that I'm very optimistic that the telling of this story will make a difference in this case for many reasons. And I think that that horror of that delivery is what becomes the catalyst for many other things going forward.
Yeah, and you know, here's the thing that you have to remember about this is that when this is all going down, like from arrest through trial through, you know, and then including obviously the birth, is that Williamson County never anticipated that anybody was going to be doing a podcast about this.
They never anticipated that anybody would question them
Yeah, well,
about anything.
that's what I'm saying. That's
Yeah.
entirely the point. And that fact happens all over this country all the time in terms of how people are treated in this country within the criminal justice system. We're shining a light on one particular case, but I just need y'all to understand this is not an exception. It's the rule. It really is the rule. Now in terms of, you know, in custody, births are not super common, but in terms of how pretrial detainees are treated in this country, it's kind of it's par for the course, and it's just important that people are hearing it, that they're willing to listen to what the realities of our system are, and more importantly, to be upset by it, because you should be. Because it's like, look, we have the system. If it's the right person and they have the evidence, that person is going to be punished. Wait for it. We have the system for a reason. You have to wait for it.
And there has to be accountability on both sides, because ultimately everybody should be on the same side. And this plays in wonderfully well to Dr. Vonda Kay's question.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be about winning. It shouldn't be about winning. Justice should not be about winning. You know, the number of times that I've heard from full exonerees who are proven factually innocent, the most painful and horrible moment for them was watching the prosecution high five after the verdict was announced. You articulated it really well, that it's the best we have, this concept of justice, but it is fragile and it needs to be protected. And again, when we talk about corruption, we talk about power corrupting, the narrative that then becomes the prosecution's right to spill into the media is really powerful.
So powerful.
And so that's why, if you lose sight of what the objective is, it's not wins.
But
it's
yeah,
justice.
God, you're so right. And in the problem is, I can't remember when one of our lives, I thought somebody asked the question, or somebody asked you and I, we were on, maybe it was our radio tour, and somebody asked if there was one thing that we could change about the system. And mine was that money didn't matter, that money, that wealth did not come into play, but it has everything to do with the system, and it's not the way that it should be. And so when you have this kind of, you have two things coming into play that shouldn't within the system, which is politics, because, you know, you have to realize that all prosecutors are elected. Those are elected officials. So the politics behind it, and then of course the money, those two things have bastardized the criminal justice system in a way that I don't know that we're ever going to be able to completely fix it, just because I don't think that those two things are ever going away. So, and it goes hand in hand with what you're talking about, where it is about wins. It's not about justice. It's not about the truth. It's a number. It's a check mark or it's a notch on the belt, so that when they're up for reelection, they can say, "This is what my conviction rate is."
I was just going to say that then it plays back into politics too, because if you ran on tough on crime, well, again, it can't be arbitrary. Like, tough on crime should still be tough on punishing people who actually did the crime, not just putting butts in jail.
I know. It's
so
you're preaching to the choir, woman. So, all right, you guys are amazing. We love you. Thank you for accommodating me this week, Lauren. I really, really appreciate it. We will be back to our normally scheduled time of Tuesday, 5 p.m. It sounds like Lauren might want me to move it up to 4, which I am fine with, by the way.
No, I'm fine. Whatever works for ask your community, because it might be much more convenient for them.
Yeah,
I mean, it's
especially for our folks from across the pond. Like, I think
totally fine.
Earlier for them is a little better. So Lauren and I will discuss it. I'll community post it and let you guys know when we're going to do it. If we're going to keep it at 5 or we'll move it up a little bit, we'll let you all know. But keep listening. Remember, new episodes every Thursday. We just had one drop yesterday. It's great. It's another great episode.
And for episode 6 next week, I really look forward to discussing this concept of a witch hunt.
Yeah, do it. Do it. All right, Lauren, you're the best. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
All right. Bye. Safe travels home. Say hi to Allie and everyone else.
Say hi to Milo. All right, you guys. We love you.
Bye, guys.
Ciao.